Hey there, welcome to this episode. We're going to be taking a look at timing correction on the MPC. In other words, quantization. You may be familiar with that term if you've never used an MPC. It's called timing correction on the MPC. Exactly the same thing. You're either snapping to the grid or you can input your notes freely. We can access it via our main page in the top bar, but just be aware it will show up in other places. I believe it's at the bottom of the arranger view. It's the same window that you're opening though. We can open this up and it gives us our timing correction options. The first one is very simple. Do we want it turned off or on? So we're either snapping to the grid or we're not. If it's on, we're snapping to whatever time division you have chosen, which is underneath. You could do a whole bar, a quarter note, 1/16 notes, that type of thing. If you want to enable triplets, you can do. And underneath here, you will notice our red rectangle, which lets us know there's something else that we can double click on the screen and open up or press the encoder. The first one is type. So how do we want to snap to the grid? We can do the start, the end, length, and legato, and you can experiment with that. If we go over to events, that is what do we want to select. So if you've got a bunch of MIDI information inside of your MIDI grid, if you do all, as you would imagine, it's going to quantize, snap all of those notes to the grid. But if we open this one up, we could then choose selected. If you're inside of your MIDI grid, you can use the selection tool to select specific notes. It could be just all of the hi-hats inside of a drum loop, could be a single note, it can be anything you like, but you can use the selection tool. If you have something selected, then when you press selected, of course, it's just going to snap the selected notes to the grid. If we move down to range and we open this up, this gives us a couple of options. It allows us to select the pad that we want to quantize. So we could choose this one over here, and you'll notice it's here. If we have something in another bank, you can choose that. So you can grab multiple samples at the same time, snap those to the grid. And underneath this, we have the range. So if you have a 4-bar loop and you only want to quantize notes in the first bar, I could come down here and say only from bar 1 to bar 1. I just want to quantize everything in the first bar. And because it's beats, bars, and ticks, or bars, beats, and ticks, you can then be quite specific and narrow that down. I generally prefer working with the selection tool. It's a little bit more hands-on, but for those of you that like working that way, you have the options here where you can select a specific range. If we take a look at the options on the bottom left-hand side, swing is the first one. And the cool thing with swing, aside from the fact that it adds swing to your drums and just to your samples in general, swing can be applied to anything. It's going to give swing and groove. We can apply it before we start recording, so we can just have this set. It goes from a range of 50 to 75, which doesn't seem like a lot, but actually a small amount of swing can make a big difference. But you can apply this beforehand, so we could start with swing of 50, input our MIDI notes, and then if we come back to this menu and say, actually, you know what, I wanted some swing of 64, we can then come back in and we can correct that by pressing to all tracks or do it. If you do it to all tracks and you press all tracks, every single track inside of your project will get that swing amount applied. And if you just press do it, it only applies it to the currently selected tracks of whatever you're working on. If we go to shift timing is an interesting way of getting some swing and moving things off the grid without the need to turn quantization off, because it allows you to input notes or even just change notes that are already input into the grid. You can change the timing of those. Now, it's 0 if we're working with 1/16 notes and you've been snapping, say, a set of hi-hats. They're all going to be snapped to exactly 1/16 notes across the grid. If you come in here, you can change the timing of those. We could say with a plus number, which is just a number written on the screen. You will notice as we go to a minus in a second, but I could move them 8 sort of behind the grid. And that's just an example, because you can see we can move all the way up here. You can move quite far away from the grid. But if we go back the other way and do a minus amount, we could do -8 before the grid. So it moves those notes ever so slightly, or a big amount depending on what you've set. And you can still do that after you've recorded some MIDI information in, or you can set it before you begin recording your sequence. If we move over to window is quite interesting. It's a way of correcting the timing, but it will be specific to certain notes. Now, it depends on what you choose. There is a range here. Now, 100% will generally quantize all of the notes, but as you play around with lower values, and you have to experiment with this a little bit, what it will do, it will look at certain notes, and if the notes are really far away from the grid, it will ignore some of those notes depending on the value, and it will only shift ones that are closer to the grid. So it's quite clever in a sense, but you do have to experiment with it. And if we move over to strength, that is just the strength of the quantization that you wish to apply. So if you want to keep a little bit of human feel in there, let's say you're finger drumming and your timing's not perfect, but it's close enough and you want to keep that feel, you could kind of set a percentage here. So you could say, you know what, I want the MPC to give me 80% correction. I want it to try and quantize 80% of the way, or a very small amount depending on how confident you are at playing or the result that you're trying to achieve. I hope that makes sense. But that is timing correction. I'll see you guys in the next episode.